Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank everyone for joining me today for this presentation of everRun Monitor, a technology overview. My name is Boule. I'm the Director of Product Management here with Marathon Technologies, and I'm going to actually be bringing you through the presentation this afternoon. Presentation is going to consist of just a couple of slides that are going to allow me to go ahead and set the stage for what you're going to see, and then ultimately move on to an actual product demonstration of everRun Monitor. And just bear with me for a moment here while I dock the GoToWebinar piece here, and we can go ahead and get the presentation up and running. And this screen here. And get started. So Marathon Technologies back on July 31st rolled out everRun Monitor, and really it's Marathon's entrance into the proactive availability market. And we really wanted to go ahead and allow customers to deploy a solution that would go beyond simply managing or riding through any failures that were incurred on their platform and making sure that their application stayed up and running. We wanted to go ahead and make sure that customers had a tool available to them that allowed them to proactively manage the actual availability of everything from the application, the operating system, the hardware, and then out to the networking and edge devices. And so ultimately, what we did was we sat down and crafted a spec for everRun Monitor that really is going to give our customers sort of that next level of availability and allow them to take a proactive stance as they manage availability. And if we look at sort of what everRun Monitor is before we jump into exactly what it does, really what it's designed to do is focus on gaps that exist in the traditional MX infrastructure. So we are, with our flagship product, going to go ahead and handle transparently any failures that happen within that MX environment. However, what everRun Monitor is designed to do is fill the gaps that exist inside of the protected virtual machine and sort of extend outside to things like downstream switches and client-side devices to make sure that the application continues to remain available. And if there's a problem, you want to know about it. The other piece of this, as we talk to customers and we position this with customers, is the concept of sort of the snowball effect. And when you're running an everRun MX installation, a failure of a disk or a failure of a network, NIC card, or the failure of an entire server is not going to cause a problem for your application or for your end users. But as those failures begin to stack up, it's important that the end user or the actual system administrator understands that these failures have taken place and ultimately is able to enact repair scenarios to fix these things as they come up. Now, the nice part about running in an MX environment is these repairs and these failures will not impact the application or the Windows instance. However, you'll certainly want to make sure that you're aware of those failures and that you're able to address those failures in a timely fashion. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do here. Now, everRun Monitor, as you're going to see during the demo, ships with a set of monitoring rules that is very specific to an MX install. However, it's been designed to be flexible enough to monitor all of the elements of an application or an IT environment that are outside of an everRun MX install. So we're really sort of creating an end-to-end tool here that we really think is a comprehensive management tool for our customers to be able to go ahead and implement. Now, the issues that you run into with sort of traditional sort of hypervisor-based monitoring, and we suffer from this, in our EAC as well, is that you look at, the hypervisor or everRun MX, and it's going to tell you that, memory is good, CPU is good, disk is good, all of those things are functioning, or if one of them is degraded, it will tell you that as well. However, What it's not doing is getting inside of the protected virtual machine or inside of the actual virtual machine and telling you if you've got a service that's failed, if you've got a memory leak somewhere, if you have an excess amount of CPU or memory utilization, if you have a disk performance problem in disk bound applications like being able to monitor average disk queue length. So all of these things require instrumentation inside of the protected virtual machine. And then as we look outward, we're not going to be able to tell you in the current product whether or not a switch has failed or whether or not a port has become saturated or if a fan has gone off on a system or if a disk on a RAID set has failed. Generally speaking, everyone is going to ride through a lot of those failures, and you're simply not going to get the amount of visibility that you need in order to address or get out in front of those potential problems and allow yourself the ability to fix them before they become an issue as it relates to your overall environment and the health and welfare of your application. And just to sort of set the stage, guys, one of the things I like to do before I jump into the product is give you a sense for sort of where we think everRun Monitor fits in the marketplace. As we look at, some of the larger sort of enterprise frameworks up in the top right-hand corner there, CA, HP, OpenView, IBM, Tivoli, those types of enterprise level frameworks, they are extremely costly. But they do scale and they come with very robust functionality. And most customers that have implemented something like that, they use point products within that environment to go ahead and monitor specific elements. And that's really where everRun Monitor would fit into an environment like that. Is if you're talking to someone that's using, say, an HP OpenView, we have the ability to actually receive and process alerts, and as part of that processing, potentially pass them up to an HP OpenView. The nice part about everRun Monitor is that it's already pre-configured to know what's going wrong inside of an MX environment, and it can pass that information up. So it certainly can fit within those large enterprise frameworks. And then you've got a lot of point products out there that are very specific to an environment or do something very specific. And, a lot of these products are limited in terms of the hypervisors they'll support, what they'll monitor in terms of, are they just grabbing making API calls and grabbing data from the hypervisor, or are they actually inside of the virtual machine? Can they agentlessly monitor things like managed switches, or are they able to go ahead and capture data from the server? Things like baseboard alarms and things of that nature. So really, this is where everRun Monitor is able to sort of set itself apart while being able to do that in a relatively effective manner, making sure that we're delivering that scalability and that functionality that you're just not going to get with any single point product. So just so, to sort of set the stage here before we dive into the demo, I wanted to review sort of where we see Monitor fitting into the overall scheme. And with that, I'm actually, I promised the PowerPoint would be short. I'm going to go ahead now and jump right into the actual product itself. Let me just go ahead and bring up the monitor screen here. And what you're going to see here, again, is a browser-based interface. Essentially, what everRun Monitor, the architecture, what it looks like is a monitoring server that's going to act as a data collector, where it will go ahead and actually actively collect information through polling of agents, and as well as agentlessly collect information from hypervisors and switches and those items where it can go ahead and actually collect data without actually deploying an agent. It will also act as an SNMP trap receiver and transmitter. So, one of the things that it will do is it will grab SNMP trap messages from things like HP's baseboard monitoring, Dell's baseboard monitoring, any switches, printers, any device out there that is capable of generating an SNMP trap message. It will grab that message, it will apply the appropriate rule, and then it will take action. And in some cases, as you're going to see during the demo, that action might include taking that trap and passing it up to an enterprise framework, or otherwise attempting to remediate a problem. like kicking off a script that will evacuate a server, or shutting down a protected virtual machine, or transitioning a level 2 PVM from one server to another. So it can do all of those things through remediation steps that are going to be taken. But it'll also collect all of those deep predictive metrics that I talked about earlier. So that ability to fill in gaps so that you're not left with either too little information that, it's telling you that the VM container is running okay, but you're not getting information that's inside of that PVM. It's also going to look at some of the core statistics around the hypervisor. In our case, Zen server, in that we are able to deploy an agent inside of the control domain there and look at its health and welfare. So all of these elements add up to the ability to effectively monitor an MX environment and take a more proactive stance toward any type of failure that may be introduced. Now, as we go ahead and kick off looking at the product, and I'm gonna be taking a couple of steps back here, but I wanted to start off with the dashboard view here, so I could describe the various elements that I'm monitoring and actually how I'm monitoring them. And then we'll take a step back and I'll walk you through sort of how I got to this point. But at the top here, I'm monitoring my virtual host. Now, these are the two servers that make up my everRun MX pair. Now, these are Zen-based hosts that are running Zen server on bare metal and have had everRun MX installed on them. And as you can see here, I'm able to look at the icons here and tell that it's a Zen host. I can tell that I've got an outstanding alert for this particular host. And I can also look at if I want to dive into the actual server metrics for this host. Now, this is a very, very effective screen if I want to understand what resources I have available to me on this MX pair. So if I'm thinking about adding additional PVMs to this set of hosts, I can take a look here and at a glance see what I've got for storage space available, see what I have for available memory, see what I have for average CPU utilization, and sort of look at the trends that are associated with the core utilization of those resources. And I can also look at these things from a historical perspective. So right now I'm looking at the last 12 hours, but I could look at, say, the last 3 days of data and get a sense for what's happened on these systems. Now, again, this is a nice sort of view if I'm thinking about expanding what I'm going to do here. And there are two spots that you want to look at in terms of resources available as you expand the number of virtual machines running on an MX pair. Obviously, the physical host resources available is one. The second is the resources that are available to you in DOM0, which we'll get to in just a moment. But as you can see here, in terms of looking at things like network throughput and breaking it down on an Ethernet by Ethernet port basis, and looking at overall availability of the device. So one of the things that everRun Monitor will do to not only just the physical hosts, but any edge device that has an IP address, it will monitor its availability. So I will go out and be able to actively interrogate a device that's available to the everRun Monitor server and be able to tell you and report on its operational status and its overall availability. I can actually, as you're going to see during the part of the demonstration, as it relates to applications like SQL Server, not only can I make sure that the SQL Server service is still running, but I can simulate client-side logins using my everRun Monitor server as well, so that I'm not only looking at it and saying, yes, the server is running, yes, the services are running inside, but active clients can actually continue to be able to connect to that database as well. As we sort of move down here, now bear in mind also that I'm actually doing this bit of monitoring here in the top section agentlessly. So I'm just giving it the IP address of the pool master here, and it's going out and pulling this data for me. The next subsection down here to list it as virtual machines is actually looking at the virtual machines that show up agentlessly on the hypervisor. So what I'm looking at here are a series of availability managers in non-protected virtual machines. So at an everRun MX environment, I'm going to be looking at the AMs that are representing the actual availability of my virtual machine. So those appliances that are managing availability of my protected virtual machines, they're reflected in this section, as well as any unprotected virtual machines that I happen to be running. And again, here, I can look at what are the metrics around this availability manager. Is it being taxed? From a supportability perspective, I'm able to come in here and assess what's going on with that protected virtual machine just by looking at its availability manager. As I move down here, I move into virtual storage. And again, I'm looking at local storage here. I don't have any shared storage set up in this environment. I'm looking at local storage on George and local storage on Fred. I've also picking up DVDs and various ISOs that are mounted on here as well. But if I take a quick look at the storage on these servers, which is another element that you want to look at as you think about adding additional protected virtual machines, I can look at a quick breakdown of what the storage is being used for, how it's being utilized, what's the breakdown in terms of virtual disk usage, used by VMs or templates, used by snapshots, used by uncoalesced VDIs, or used by orphan virtual disks. So again, a quick breakdown of what's happening with the storage. And then as I move down here to my agent-based physical and virtual machines, this is where I get into the data that surrounds my protected virtual machines. So here, I've deployed agents inside of my PVM. So I've got combined demo, I've got DR replica, DR master, and then just straight demo. I've also deployed agents inside of the control domains of these servers, so I can get some statistics around what's happening inside of DOM0, and I can understand whether or not I've got enough resources inside of DOM0 to sustain things like a mirror storm. How much headroom do I have in DOM0 based on the various activities that I'm going to run on top of this MX platform? So again, I've got complete visibility in the entire stack here and really an understanding of what's happening inside of that control domain. And then ultimately the protected virtual machines themselves. So I can look at, have I allocated enough physical memory? Have I allocated enough disk? Have I allocated enough CPU power? And the nice part about this is with an MX enterprise environment, if you discover that you are under powered from a CPU perspective, because we offer FTSMP, you can simply go in and add additional CPU resources here in the event that you notice that that's a problem. But again, a very high level understanding of what's happening here. And then as you can see here, I'm looking at availability of this protected virtual machine on three fronts. One, I'm looking for a response from the everRun monitor agent. I'm looking for a response from the actual IP address, so ping out to this protected virtual machine. But I'm also looking for a response to a connection I'm making to the SQL server running inside of this protected virtual machine. And again, I'm actually logging in as a client to this SQL server, and I'm doing it, in this case, I believe I'm running it every 5 minutes. And I'll be alerting an operator in the event that a failure occurs or I'm unable to log in for a sustained period of time. So again, sort of a third party sitting there making sure that not only is the protected virtual machine running properly, but all the processes inside of the virtual machine are running properly, but also it appears from the outside that everything is running correctly with this protected virtual machine. And again, just something that you're not able to get without running something like everRun Monitor. And then down here, I show some examples of some edge devices. So some devices that are outside of the MX ecosystem that I'm actually able to monitor. And they're probably part of what you're running for an application. For example, I want to look at a switch that I'm running. This is obviously a critical part of the infrastructure. It controls whether or not my clients are able to connect. It controls the server's ability to go ahead and present databases to the outside world. And I want to make sure that this switch remains available. I also want to make sure that I'm monitoring the availability on a port-by-port basis. So as you can see here, I've got all the ports on this switch listed, and it's also monitoring the activity that's happening on these ports. And so the other piece you want to look at here, of course, when you start looking at things like performance issues, one of the first things you need visibility into is, where's my bottleneck? Where am I having a problem? And if you have an uplink port that is saturated because it's got 3 or 4 things converging on it at once, that's a potential bottleneck here. And you're going to be able to monitor that, alert on that, and ultimately understand on a port by port basis what's happening on that managed switch. Again, this is just an example of yet another edge device that I can monitor and make sure that it's available. I'm also doing the same thing for, in this case, I've got a couple of iDRAC or lights out cards that are installed in these servers. And, people think that these are pieces of infrastructure that are nice to have, but if you're managing a server that's 100 miles away, having access to this lights out card is critical. And its availability is critical. So not only am I able to capture SNMP trap messages from this lights out card as they're generated, but I'm also able to interrogate this card to make sure that it's still responding to web-based logins. So what I've done here, I'll show you this rule as we move into the second phase of the demo. I've actually set everRun Monitor up to actually, on a periodic basis, log into the web console of these DRAC cards to make sure that it continues to be available. And if it's not available, if it becomes disconnected, if a problem occurs where the monitor server can't access the DRAC card, I'll be alerted to that. Now, when you think about these things, you can think about them in the sense of any type of edge device that you might have out there, we're going to be capable of monitoring. So whether it's a camera, a door panel, a cooling unit, anything that's on the network with an IP address or anything that generates SNMP traps, we're going to be able to report an accurate status of that device for you and help you understand what's going on beyond the PVM container. So moving your availability management out from the MX platform into either the client side or into the infrastructure portion of your deployment. So whether that be, again, cameras, door panels, temperature sensors, whatever the case might be. So that's sort of what's being monitored here. But let me take a quick step back here and talk to you a little bit about configuration and sort of setup, and then we'll move into actually looking at some of the alerts that get generated out of the tool and the flexibility that you have to collect data from your environment and ultimately be able to understand what's happening. Now, as we move through the product, you can see here the opening splash screen, which is going to include some wizards around monitoring the different elements in your environment. We start off here with the hypervisor itself. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we created this tool is to allow not just our everRun MX customers, but anybody to experience the proactive availability management that we're putting together here. So we're going to monitor VMware and Zen Server and soon Hyper-V. We're going to actually be able to monitor the physical servers. And that's really where we're going to deploy agents to get you those deep metrics. We've got a very, very lightweight agent that sits in the background and will tell you things like whether or not your application service has failed, whether or not you've got a performance bottleneck based on disk queue length or network latency. So all of these things are going to allow you to sort of dive deep into the performance of the application along with its availability by deploying an agent. We're actually, obviously able to monitor things like the applications and databases. So we're looking at the SQL Server service. We're looking at any custom application services that are deployed and telling you their status and the processes that those applications spawn. We're looking at what they consume in terms of resources and helping you understand what's going on there. I just showed you an example of networking. So being able to monitor network switches and being able to identify saturation points on a port-by-port basis. And then things like physical storage and other data center components and edge devices. Those are all things that we're going to be able to monitor as well. Now, to set the stage, I actually showed you the dashboard earlier. Let me go to my inventory screen. Now, I've done a lot of this and pre-configured a lot of this already. And as you can see here, I've got a whole list of things that I'm currently monitoring in this two-host environment. And as you can see, everything that's got an agent version listed next to it actually has an agent deployed on it. And then ultimately, everything else is being monitored from an agentless perspective. And you see down here, I've got my MX switch. I've got my iDRAC cards that I'm monitoring. And if I look here at the iDRAC card, just as an example, you'll see I'll come in here and I'll look at this device. And I can come into this device and actually give it a name, assign it the IP address, I can actually group the device. So if I've got various groups that I've put together, or in the event that, let's say, I'm using this tool as a multi-tenant tool. So if I want to go ahead and ultimately monitor multiple clients with this one installation or one server, I can create a multi-tenant environment here. And then I can click on the properties here and ultimately get into looking at the various things that I'm monitoring. So in this case here for IP services, I can look at all my options in terms of monitoring this device. In this case, I'm actually pinging this device, but I also mentioned I'm logging into the actual device itself to make sure that it's still continuing to accept logins. So I've plugged in the username and password here. I've plugged in the fact that it's an HTTP login. I'm going to go ahead and log into that device and make sure that it continues to be able to accept those logins. And so I'm able to do that here. And on a device by device basis, I'm able to do things like monitor FTP, monitor SMTP, monitor SQL, monitor. I can use Telnet to monitor. I can use all of these protocols to actually interrogate the device and make sure that it's still responding to end users. Now, one of the other things I mentioned to you was I had a SQL server running on here. I've done that here, where I've gone ahead and created a monitoring rule here that's going to go ahead and actually log into SQL. And if I look here, I've given it the SQL credentials that I want to use, and I'm going ahead and actually logging into the database. So I'm confirming availability for both inside of the PVM and outside of the PVM of the actual application itself. So even if the PVM container continues to run, even if it's computing through a disk failure or a server failure, I still have to know that the application running inside of there is functioning. And so I'm able to do that here as well. And I could do that on an asset by asset basis as I add the assets to the device or to the monitoring server, and are able to keep close tabs on what's happening. Now, the way I keep tabs on those things is through setting up a series of monitoring rules. Now, the monitoring rules are interesting in that they allow me to go ahead and customize my environment. They allow me to go ahead and tell the monitor server what to look for, and when it sees it, what to do with it. Now, one of the nice things about the everRun MX monitor is that we have actually shipping the product already pre-configured to monitor an MX environment. So essentially, you'll be monitoring all of those critical components just by pointing this at the MX pool and deploying agents to your protected virtual machines. So once you've done that, all of the rules that we feel like are important elements to monitoring just a base MX environment, you're able to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to show you how to create those custom rules so that now you can turn around and look at, well, I want to monitor some custom application inside of the PVM. But here are all the rules that I've set up here, and some of these are pre-configured. So all the ones that have everRun MX listed next to them are all pre-configured rules. However, if I want to, I can come in here and select a rule that I want to create. And I'm going to actually go through each rule type, and then I'll actually show you an example of a rule that you can create and all the flexibility that you have with creating that rule. So I look here and I've got an event log watch, which I think is self-explanatory in that it'll allow me to go ahead and monitor my event log for specific entries. I got a Windows Services watch, and again, I can designate specific Windows services that I want to look at and I want to take action upon failure. I've got a process watch, so the processes that are spawned by that Windows service, and I want to monitor them for various resource consumption, their overall running state, when they've actually started. I can be alerted on all of those things. I can look at things like FileWatch. Now, FileWatch is an interesting and flexible tool. This is sort of a twofold watch. This allows me to go ahead and monitor a file or a directory for a specific search string. Now, what that means is that I can look for at log files that are, sort of custom log files, and I can put in a single search string, and it will continually monitor for that search string within that directory. This will also serve as an element of security, in that I can go ahead and monitor directories for changes. So I can look at a specific directory, or I can look at a specific file and know and audit when it's been changed. So I can certainly set that type of watch up. Counter watch, again, is pretty self-explanatory. One of the things that you're able to do is customize the Windows counters, the performance counters that are collected and stored in the database here, and ultimately monitor those in real time as they reach thresholds. Things like advanced watch, when you want to monitor when a script is run, when you want to monitor when a batch file has been kicked off or a certain executable has been run. This is another piece of nice security here. So I can come into advanced watch and tell it I want to know every time a program with this extension has been executed in my environment, and I want to be alerted, and I want that to be logged. We can monitor things like log on and log off as well. Now you come down here to the agentless piece, and again, we start talking about things like Citrix and VMware Watch, Server Watch, which ultimately is going to allow me to monitor on things like ping or SQL or login, so I don't have to deploy an agent to an entity in order to do these types of watches. Syslog, if I want to go ahead and publish my syslogs, and that's the other nice part about Monitor, it can act as a centralized syslog server. And then obviously we looked at a switch from a port bandwidth monitoring perspective. I can do that as well. But if I look here to give you an example of what a watch looks like in the interest of time, I'm just going to pick one and run with it. I'll choose Event Log Watch because it's fairly simple. I can simply look here at the type of log I want to look at, or the log I want to look at, the type of message I want to look for. I can put in an event ID or some other search string here that will go ahead and say, I want to look for this particular event. I want to create this particular watch to look for this specific event, and I want to be notified when it happens. And then, the other thing you can do is you can schedule the watch. Now, a lot of times, these things, you want to turn these things off when there's known maintenance going on, or when something like this is going to happen. You're only concerned with it happening between 9 and 5 or between midnight and 6. You can go ahead and turn this watch on or off in a really sort of automated fashion without having to sit there and physically turn it on and off. Now I can also pick my notification format. So again, I can come in here and look at an email address. I can go ahead and plug in an SNMTP server and ultimately spawn an email. I can go ahead and pass up an SNMP trap message. Now, as I mentioned before, we are a nice intermediary for those large-scale enterprise frameworks. That means that we are both a trap receiver and a trap generator. So if I need to integrate everRun Monitor with, say, a large enterprise framework, I can use SNMP trap messages as the mechanism for which to do that. I can go ahead and generate syslog entries. So if I want to go ahead and pass a syslog entry up to, or publish a syslog entry to an enterprise framework, I can do that as well. Or if I've got this server in a remote location and I want to get out via, say, a modem port, I can do that as well by configuring it here. And then lastly, I can go ahead and choose a form of remediation if I want. So, obviously these rules, once they're assigned, will go ahead and do things like cause color changes to graphics inside of the dashboard, will generate emails or other forms of notification. But one of your other options here is to actually remediate a problem. So if you've identified an issue, or if you have a known issue and you want to monitor for it, and you want to take very specific action when that issue is seen, you can go ahead and script that out, and then ultimately go ahead and run a script either on the monitoring server, on the server that's being monitored, or on another selected server somewhere in your infrastructure. And you can go ahead and craft that script. It will run that script on the server that you've chosen to remediate the problem. The other thing you can do is you can automate the process of ultimately restarting the server. So you can go ahead and reboot an element if you want to. And ultimately, on restore, you can pick a program that runs as well. So you can really get into sort of a lot of customization in terms of remediation here, in terms of how you want to remediate specific problems. If you know a problem exists, and you want to make sure that action gets taken so that you don't have to, or your customer doesn't have to get out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's an option here for these folks to be able to go ahead and remediate that. So in the framework of all this, once you've gone ahead and selected a rule, you can then go ahead and ultimately assign that rule to various servers. And ultimately, you can come over to your inventory page here. You can pick an asset, and you can look at the rules that it's eligible for. So what rules can this asset run or be run against this asset? And ultimately just check these boxes off. So it makes it very simple once you have a rule in place to go ahead and deploy that rule to the various monitored elements within your environment, making it very simple. And then once you've got all this set up, now we get into the actual monitoring. And now we get into the actual what's happening in my environment. I've gone ahead and configured all this, but I want to understand what's going on. Now, as you can see here, we've got various color codings based on the severity of an event that's taken place. If I drill down in here, I can see I've got a rather benign event that I generated here, in that I've got a physical disk blink that I've initiated. But obviously, this has captured an SNMP trap message from this server, has processed it, is reporting it in the dashboard, and ultimately is doing anything else that I want to do with it. It's applying that message that it received and applying the various rules that I've assigned to the assets that I've assigned it to. So it could do something simple like kick off a script that's going to go ahead and shut that server down. It can go ahead and restart services. It can go ahead and migrate virtual machines or protected virtual machines. But ultimately, when you have a situation like that, you can go ahead and remediate that, but you can see it here in our dashboard. And if I acknowledge that alert, it will return the system status to green so that I know that that issue has been dealt with. Now, some of the other, quote, dashboard types of things we wanted to provide was just an at-a-glance look at the core resources that are being utilized. So CPU, memory, system availability, and the various elements that are being monitored here within this server. And let me go ahead and just refresh this here. Seems that my browser has stopped responding. See if I can bring that up in another window here. And there we go. So it looks like I lost network connectivity there for just a moment. So what I can do here is obviously monitor those core resources that are being utilized across the environment. So whether I want to monitor CPU, memory, storage utilization, again, at a glance monitoring. And then the system availability tab, where not only am I able to create all of these robust rules and make sure that all my complex processes are running correctly, but I can simply look at this tab and make sure that, boy, everything is available. I've got availability here. I know that everything is happening. Everything is green. These entries will turn to red in the event that I get a negative response. But again, an availability dashboard that makes it simple to sort of at a glance see what's going on here. And then ultimately, any SNMP trap messages that may have gotten passed up or passed on, I'm able to quickly see those messages here as well. And then ultimately, if I want to do things like monitor my registry, so if I want to go ahead and monitor a specific registry entry on a server, make sure it's not changing, I can go ahead and do that here as well. So these are all things that we wanted to go ahead and put into the product that really gave you as the user or your customer the ability to go ahead and make sure that all the things that they want to see happen or want to make sure are happening are indeed happening. And then the last piece I want to cover before I move on and actually sort of wrap up here and take your questions is our ability to go ahead and collect those performance statistics in real time. So if you look here, I'm looking at, protected virtual machines. I can expand a given protected virtual machine, and all of the performance counters are exposed here. Now, what I can do is select the performance counters that I want to monitor, collect that information, and then start building rules around those. But the other thing that I can do here is I can actually, once I've started collecting that information, historically graph that information as well. And so if I'm looking at a situation where I want to do some forensics on a performance issue, or I want to better understand what may have been happening, I can simply go ahead and open up a series of performance graphs. So in this case here, I've already saved the combined disk queue length, but I want to come back here and I want to also look at things like, um, processor status, but I want to look at it from yesterday. So I can go ahead and replay processor status from yesterday and sort of the overall processor availability. And here's my idle state and my usage state down here. And as you can see, it's sort of ticking off as things have played. And now my disk queue length, real-time disk queue length monitor is over here. I can obviously go ahead and continue to open these dashboard type graphs up and look at things like database transactions per second or DOM0 CPU utilization. And again, look at all this information in real time and sort of flip-flop between these graphs here. Now, again, as I'm collecting this data, not only am I just able to graph it, but I'm actually monitoring thresholds around this in real time as well. And I'm able to go ahead and set up specific monitoring rules around that. So, guys, I hope that's given you a small window into what the product is capable of doing. I know that we had looked at maybe doing a half an hour, and I always go a little bit over. The product is very robust. It was designed that way so that you would have access to monitor all the various elements and really manage proactive availability with a tool that we're able to provide you. Really, ultimately, the product itself is designed to make sure that you're able to monitor and ultimately get some insight into all elements of the IT stack here and make sure you're not limited to just looking at whether or not a server is responding to a ping. However, it will do that. The product itself, again, is pretty straightforward to set up and use, and I think that for the most part, you'll find it very easy to get from our website in terms of a trial, and it's essentially download and go. With that said, I want to transition over to any questions that I may have come in here. And I see a bunch, so if I don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to me after the fact, and I'll certainly get back to you. The first question I received was, are you able to actually monitor the existence or whether or not a process is running? And I think I covered that a little bit here in the monitoring rules section, but let me go back to it real quick so I can give you a flavor for how that works. If I come over here and I want to look at a given process and see if it's indeed running, I can simply go ahead and click on New, click on Process Watch, and click OK. And ultimately, what I can do is I can tell the system what status, well, first off, what process do I want to monitor? And then what status should it be in? Should it be running or non-running? And then ultimately, do I want to look at any thresholds? Do I want to look at how long it's been running for? What's the average CPU and memory utilization? Those are the types of deep metrics that I can get into. So yes, I can't easily monitor individual processes on a server and ultimately look for their health and welfare. The next question I've received is, are you able to monitor critical elements of an MX infrastructure? We are able to. So ultimately, guys, anything from monitoring the isolation IP to monitoring the existence of quorum, all of those things come pre-packaged with the product. So I'm able to go ahead and monitor all of those things directly. The other thing that's important to understand is that this will also pass over all of the elements that are monitored from within the EAC. So if a disk goes wrong or if a network card goes wrong, you're going to see all that in your dashboard. You can also set up rules that will go ahead and proactively alert you to those things. So it will send an email, it will send an SNMP trap message to in sort of an enterprise framework. So it will do all of those things without issue. Let's see here if I've got any additional questions. And the other question I've got here, and this was the last question we'll have time for. The physical disk also includes individual RAID hard drive sets? The answer there is yes. So one of the things that we're going to be able to do is monitor for the failure of an individual disk on a RAID set. So we'll capture that trap and be able to pass it up to you or be able to notify you that that's gone wrong. So all of that can indeed happen here with the product. Guys, I think that the best way to sort of get an understanding for it is to actually download the product. We'd love to see you download it and get a sense for how it works. We have a 30-day free trial that's out on the website, so we'd encourage you to go ahead and fill out the form, grab the trial. It's fully supported, so if you have questions or concerns around setup, we're certainly here to help. We've also recorded this session, so I'm going to make sure that each one of you gets a follow-up recording of this session that you can pass along to any colleagues or anybody that wasn't able to make it. To wrap up, we really appreciate your time. Again, this session was really designed just to give you a brief introduction to the product. I hope you found it valuable. We hope that you'll go out, download the product, and if you have questions on positioning it with customers or actually how to use it in your environment, please reach out to your Marathon representative, as we'd be happy to sit down